let's go across the tippy top and let's name the 4 tissue types. Epithelial, connective, muscle, and the last one, nervous. Those are the 4 tissue types. In your entire body, there are only 4 types of tissue. And then within those giant categories, we have all different examples of them. They vary somewhat, but they do have some basic characteristics that ring true, and we'll share those. So let's start with location, then we'll move to function, we'll go to characteristics, and we'll finish with examples. So epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is your covering and lining tissue. Covers the body. Someone mentioned skin a moment ago. Skin is epithelial tissue. Lines your organs. So your organs are lined with this particular type of tissue. And finally, it comprises your glands. Your endocrine and exocrine glands are composed of epithelial tissue. So your pituitary gland is epithelial tissue. Your sweat glands are epithelial tissue. We will draw them both in this unit and in the skin unit when we talk about glands in more detail. Okay, let's get to the functions. So the functions of epithelial tissue. I like to use the acronym PEAS. The functions of epithelial tissue are as follows. Protection, think about your skin. Excretion, think about your skin for excretion. Think about your glands, like your sweat glands, excretion. Absorption, taking in, taking things in. And lastly, secretion, which again, secretion referring to making a product and sending it out. And glands do that as well. Then let's get to some characteristics. Epithelial tissue is avascular. So this is no blood vessels. Epithelial tissue has no blood vessels in it. It's supplied with blood another way. That tissue itself does not have its own blood supply. So it receives blood from a different way. It's not going to have vasculature running through it. So it's going to get oxygen and nutrients from a different way. The second thing is that this type of tissue readily divides. Readily, meaning a lot. So this is tissue that divides a lot. If you think about your skin renews itself every 30 days. Okay, so the last one is cells are tightly packed. Cells are tightly packed together. And that's going to matter in a couple of ways when we talk about the connective tissue. We're going to compare and contrast connective tissue and epithelial tissue. We often do. Muscle tissue and nervous tissue really do stay on their own. But connective and epithelial are intimately connected, and we'll talk about them as the same features here, and then we'll describe how they're different in connective tissue. And then finally, examples. I'm just going to give you one, skin, and then there are many examples. But we'll stop there because we're just doing an intro. We're doing an overview of the 4 tissue types. We're going to dive into them as we move through this unit. All right, let's get to connective tissue. It is such a vast group of tissues that you're going to say, wait, that's a tissue? Wait, that is similar enough to that tissue, so they're lumped together? Yep. In fact, let me kind of start from the bottom up. Let me give you examples and make you see blood, bone. Yep, your blood and your bone are in the same tissue category. Fat. Bone and fat are in the same tissue category. Cartilage. That one might not be too shocking now that you see bone is in there, but nonetheless, that is a connective tissue. Let's jump back up here to location. So now that I've said that, this will make a lot of sense. It's everywhere. It is the most abundant tissue type you have. Of all of the types of tissue in your body, you are mostly composed of connective tissue. It's the most abundant, the most numerous. It's everywhere. Its function, as you can imagine, it would have a varied amount of functions because we have bone, we have blood, we have fat, we have cartilage, and they all do different things as well. So I like to say GMAPs. The G stands for glue. And in fact, that probably makes sense because the name of the tissue is connective. It's a connecting tissue. Glue connects things. So we call it the glue of the body. We also say that it binds. So there's no B up here, so you don't have to write this one if you want. But if you see glue, bind makes sense with glue, and they kind of go together. What else? Well, the other thing is the MA. The second part, MA, stands for makes blood. Your connective tissue makes blood, and blood is a connective tissue. Your connective tissue makes blood, and blood is also a connective tissue. Protection, support, and structure. So characteristics. We're going to compare it back to epithelial tissue. Well, a moment ago you learned epithelial tissue is avascular. Connective tissue is not avascular. In fact, it itself is the vasculature, because I just said blood is an example of connective tissue. So it is vascular. It has its own blood supply. And in fact, it is connective tissue that is supplying epithelial tissue with oxygen and nutrients. They're intimately linked. It does divide. I'm going to leave that though. It's not, readily as this, but it has division. That's fine. We'll go to this one. Cells are tightly packed. Instead of cells being tightly packed, as we see with epithelial tissue, instead the cells are far apart and they are encased in a substance called extracellular matrix, abbreviated ECM, and I will use that abbreviation a lot. A matrix is a substance comprised of lots of different things, and different connective tissues have different matrices. We'll learn about all of the different ones. So muscles, let's talk about the location. So they're on the skeleton. They comprise the heart, cardiac muscle. So on the skeleton, cardiac, and then it's found in the walls of hollow organs. So your stomach is a hollow organ. Your small intestine is a hollow organ. Your large intestine is a hollow organ. Your esophagus is a hollow organ. All of those, the muscle that comprises those organs is smooth muscle. Let's go to our functions. So the functions, very simple. Movement. And finally, the characteristics. So the characteristics are the tissue is able to contract, which means shorten, and move, allow movement. Able to contract and allow movement. And then your examples are threefold, just as we said a moment ago. The examples are skeletal, which is the muscle on the skeleton, cardiac, and then smooth. And this muscle is the muscle in the walls of hollow organs. All right, so the location of the nervous tissue, the brain and the spinal cord. The nervous tissue is found in the brain and the spinal cord. We hear often people always say, oh, you need to work your most important muscle. And then they're referring to the brain. And that, of course, is completely wrong. Your brain is not a muscle. Your brain is nervous tissue. Muscle and nervous tissue are very, very different. Structurally, functionally, very, very different. Your brain is not a muscle. Your brain is nervous tissue. So the function is going to be, CRIS is the abbreviation, and that stands for coordination, regulation, integration, and sensation or sensory. So those are functions of the nervous tissue. You'll see how we're going to integrate them into the characteristics in a moment. So the function of the nervous tissue are that it coordinates and regulates your body using integration and sensation, able to send electrochemical messages. So the characteristics of the nervous tissue is that it has the ability to send electrochemical messages. And that's actually its means of regulating and coordinating the body. It's what you do when you sense something and then integrate it. And then finally, the examples are the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves.